go. Hello, everybody. It's Laura Eisenhower. I have a really special guest today, somebody that I've gotten to know a little bit over the last couple of years, but never enough. So I'm so thrilled to have him here because I will get to learn a lot about his research and what he's doing. His name is Simon Esler. And hello, Simon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm going to start with his bio, but I've got, a ton of questions. And here it goes. Simon Esler is a full disclosure activist, healer, energy practitioner, researcher, writer, actor, philosopher, father, and adept student of experience. He is ordained by the Government of Ontario as a Metaphysical Minister of the Bancroft Center for Awakening Spiritual Growth. As a certified Life-Cycle Celebrant, he is trained in the art of custom ceremony creation, and through Rainbow Kids Yoga, he is certified in the art of creating children's meditations. He is an alumni of York University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in theater studies. And in November 2017, he launched the QAnon think tank. With an incredible team, he has grown into a 14,000 member community focused on researching, filing, and disseminating the QAnon disclosures. He is a co-host of the Great Awakening .ca and Cosmic Table Talk on the Sphere Being Alliance YouTube channel. He is currently producing a new series on Edge of Wonder TV called Worlds Within, exploring the metaphysical depths of our reality and their connection to our personal power. He has been a speaker at consciousness and ufology events in Toronto, California, and Colorado. Awesome. Oh my gosh. So I don't know where to begin.
Yeah, ask away.
Yeah, I mean, I love the part of it where you say student of experience. I always consider that to be the greatest learning ground that we could possibly, grow from and understand ourselves better from. I mean, what better to learn about ourselves than the things we manifest and the things that show up in our lives. But maybe, before we jump into some of the questions about your current work and the things that you present at events and the upcoming TV show that it has already begun, right? The Edge of Wonder TV.
Yeah, we got 2 episodes up on the platform, and number 3 will be out this Wednesday.
So awesome. Was there like a big moment of awakening? I know we all have different stages and there's different levels of it, but when did this really hit you? Just this greater work that you're here to do?
I would say it was around probably 2009, 2010, when I really, I was hit by a past life memory, like a really intense and kind of devastating past life memory where I was leaving a planet of mine that's life was coming to an end. It wasn't that it had been like destroyed in a war or anything like that. It was really just like the natural ending to this planet's life cycle. But this memory hit me so hard. I was actually online. I was looking at pictures of galaxies and it just triggered something in me. And I sat there and I just wept. And it became very clear to me in that moment that I had past lives outside of, this solar system. And what eventually became clear as I contemplated that experience was that because Earth is struggling with some of that karma, with the planet being in danger and with some of the history of planetary destruction in our solar system, that there was sort of something I had from that experience that I could offer as like a medicine for this planet and for this time on Earth. So it took me some time to sort of transmute it and make it a medicine to offer, but that was really where a lot of this began for me. That was, I'd say the major moment of awakening that sort of created a cascade.
Right. And when did you say that was, or did you say?
2009, 2010.
2009. Yeah. That was such a significant time. And so just a lot coming up with, this Earth experience. So you study a lot of, galactic history and.
Yeah. I mean, that triggered me into just being curious about that. So I started into that. Yeah.
And so you're also like an energy practitioner, and having this bigger knowledge base must really help, because when you work with clients, you can see more than probably most would, as far as what people are carrying from a history that has been, very cut off from all of us.
Yeah, that larger perspective is really helpful in guiding people. Even if I don't, necessarily overtly address something on that scale, even
Yeah.
just having a sense of it, it lets you serve people on a much, I guess, more archetypal level.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there's a lot that you've brought to the table here, and I want to go into just your thought about war. You have some very, very interesting perspectives, and also like a summary about, the next show coming up. And,
Yeah.
Obviously people can sign up for the TV show and get the archives of the ones that you've previously done, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
would figure. Yeah.
And
Um,
the first episode, what I start with is sort of trying to create a definition of war that gives us something more to work with, because I think the common definition of war is that it's something that is inherently violent and
right.
aggressive. I think when we start to study the history of war and all the different kinds of war, it's really just a fundamental struggle between two different wills. And that's what it comes down to, I think, is this persistent struggle between two wills that are irreconcilable. And I think that's just a part of the density or the dimension that we're currently occupying. So I find that fundamental definition is a really good place to start, and that's where I start in the series.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So why don't we'll go to the thought that I had now that we've just kind of like opened this up. I wouldn't want to kind of shift gears at this moment. So would you say that there's two different versions? One might be, for personal sovereignty and for the reasons that are very like necessary and important. And then there's the sort of engineered version that we don't fully understand why certain world wars or events, have taken place. Can you help us to kind of differentiate between, war that is necessary for us to move out of the control matrix and wars that have been engineered to keep us kind of stuck in it? Do you go into that kind of stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when we look at war as something that is about will and is about willpower, I mean, that's where our journey begins. Because if we're here on Earth to make a fundamental choice to be of service, well, we're doing that on a planet where that is going to be inherently difficult. I mean, that's the nature of Earth's context right now. It's very difficult to make that choice every day over and over again in a way that is meaningful and authentic. And so that takes the refining of one's will. We really do have to work in this life to strengthen our willpower and the precision of our willpower. So I would say that's the place, that's the version of war where, we're up against other forms of will that would seek to stop our ability to choose service every day. Whereas something like a world war, that's better seen as actually a tactic that is used by, the deep state and these nefarious groups. These engineered wars are just a tactic they use to a different end. So they will engineer a war just to arrive at a larger strategy that they have down the line. So it could be raising funds, it could be social engineering, it's likely both. But I find that helpful in terms of, the breakdown of war as I understand it is that war fighting on Earth, you have the strategic level. So you have your war fighting strategy. Then beneath that, you have operations, right, that come from that strategy. And then operations are made up of tactics. So if we look at it with those sort of tiers, then you can see that, a group like the deep state, they have a strategy to construct a new world order. They have a strategy to, depopulate the earth. And a world war is just an operation for them within that larger strategy. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very well put. So with us on the other side of it, humans that want the basic rights of our needs being met, clean environment, clean food, protection for our children, a better law enforcement, in order to really help us take down criminals that are in powerful positions. Where do you see us as a humanity right now? What can we do in the face of this? I mean, where would the best approach to win this level of war that you see, knowing that there's the option of protests, or I mean there's a lot of different options, and a lot of people also feel defeated. I mean, we hear the news, coronavirus or something, and that infection of information that, you know, has the truth, but also might have a lot of distortion. What do we do in the face of this? Knowing that sometimes war is necessary, how can we best combat this and not get entangled in it? You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Well, you know, the reason I wanted to study this was because, as far as I could tell, throughout history, it seems like war has actually been the best example of collective will being organized and applied. And that has been historically through violence, unfortunately. But when we look at the way war organizes large groups of human beings, and then it applies the will of those human beings to a task, it's actually very effective. And that's one of the fundamental things that I seek to learn from war, and that I hope to teach people about war, is that if we can reach that level of effectiveness in organizing as a collective, and we can apply our collective will with that level of effectiveness, then we can achieve things like, cleaning up the environment and, regaining our sovereignty. And we can even look at it from those levels that I talked about a moment ago, from the idea of having overall strategies, and then letting those strategies, that we develop as a community, give birth to clear operations, which are made up of tactics. That way of organizing our will is very, very effective. So community is a big aspect of this. And I think to organize ourselves in that way and to learn from war, we do have to drop these notions of being sort of anti-war, in that sense of sort of being triggered by the word, and learning to organize ourselves effectively in that way. So, I for this series, I've been studying The Art of War, Sun Tzu's book, and that's a really interesting way into this, right? Because when you look at the sort of wisdom that was gathered about war fighting in this book, you start to understand that it doesn't need to be applied to violence. It's more about learning to understand your enemy. You're learning to understand that other will that we're up against, and to understand it like very, very deeply, and in a way where you're not triggered by their presence. And that takes some time, right? Because there's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of pain from the presence of those who have chosen the negative path on earth. But we have the blessing of being here. We have the blessing of being the ones who are here to serve this planet. And when we can sort of land in like, okay, like I made a fundamental choice to be here. Now I have to study what happened to this planet, and then get together with my community, and we need to become organized and apply ourselves in that way. I think there's a lot there that we could be doing more effectively.
Oh, that's so brilliant, because the conquer and divide tactics are what make it so hard, and it is a bit of a chess game.
Yeah.
And and there doesn't have to be, loss or the fear of defeat when we come together and we have that will, because the mind control keeps us from being able to do that, and the social engineering, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The war on consciousness. Yeah. So, it's really, really important to because there's a lot about the new age, what I consider to be sometimes deception, about all love and light. And that doesn't fully resonate with me. And some people are like surprised when they see another side of me that stands my ground, that says, excuse me, I'm not going to let you walk all over me, and throw stones at me. I just feel it's a protection thing, but somebody might think I'm actually going to war with that person, but it's just, I don't want that energy in my space. So what are your thoughts about some of that kind of propaganda of that love and light? Do you kind of challenge that in some of your talks?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that's like one of the most successful psyops that has been launched on this planet, has been to basically build the new age movement from scratch. I believe that the majority of it was engineered. And my understanding is that came from these occult groups understanding karma and cycles better than us. And they understood that there was going to be a wave of potential that would arrive, and they needed to redefine the application of that energy in a way that would cause us to feel like we were, moving into this new consciousness, and to really create that sensation while actually making us quite ineffective in applying our collective will. So when we learn to understand the way that was manipulated, I think there's a lot to be gathered there. And that's, some of that just comes from personal research, looking into that deception, but a lot of it just comes from proper introspection and learning to understand that we are deeply sort of contradictory beings. We have this wealth of passion within us that can hold the light and the dark in a way that is peaceful. And I think that's something that humanity is starting to step into. We often hear these stories about how we're perceived in the galaxy, that humanity is this sort of unique entity that has this emotional depth and sort of breadth that is kind of rare and hard to understand for a lot of races. But I think within that, there is a power to apply ourselves and to apply our free will with something very rich, I think, in this galaxy's history.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's these movements just definitely seem to hijack what they are predicting or can, tell we're naturally going to step into, because it's no secret. And with the occult knowledge that they hold, what these cycles, like you said, are about, and this window period of ascension and these timeline wars connected to this particular period. So these kind of topics are so incredibly important. Not a whole lot of people talk about it. So I'm so glad to get to know you and your work more. You just don't hear people talking about this stuff. And to be able to redefine the way we relate to certain things, to bring that, spirit, that willpower, that fighting spirit, where ego, and our self willpower is not in the wrong kind of expression. It's connected to our higher self. It's connected to our divine nature. So,
yes.
I mean, when you hear people kind of bashing the ego and that whole, it just seems like that's a target to keep us, like almost afraid
Absolutely.
of stepping in our power for the right reasons.
I totally agree, because I was actually looking at this today. I was going over some of Michael Newton's work again, because I've really been, that's been a big resource for this series. And I was looking into one of the hypnosis sessions he did with a client that brought them into the space where souls are being sort of birthed and created. And there's this one specific section, the client in the session describes it as the world without ego. And it's this space in which souls are endowed with ego, because that's their like unique signature. And so it's really beautiful. The way it's described, it's this like wonderful gift that's imparted upon the soul so that it becomes unique and becomes self-aware and begins its journey. So when you understand that this was a gift given to us so that we could, move into the karma of, experiencing separation towards unity and that whole epic journey, then that starts to, I think, it starts to subdue all these weird ideas that ego is bad, because we were gifted this as an important tool, like at the sort of beginning of our whole experience. And I find going over that passage really helpful in sort of healing those notions.
Yeah, gosh. So what do you notice? I mean, you started this group, you said 14,000 and growing.
Yeah.
What do you do with the opposition? Because I mean, when I even mention anything on social media connected to Q or anything about this administration, it's very, very hard, some of the negative energy that gets directed. And it's very frustrating, because I think this is something that's worthy of our, greater understanding. So I guess there's a double question here. How has that navigation process been, and what revelations are recent when it comes to, Q drops or anything in relation to Q? And also, what do you do in the face of a lot of opposition or criticism about, oh, it's a psyops, or, you must be giving your power away, which I don't, agree with. I kind of sit on the fence often. And in this interview, I'm not going to share my full on opinion, and I don't want to put you in a position of, wanting to talk about or talking about anything you wouldn't want to, but would you be able to answer any of those questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, look, the way that QAnon is impacting the world is it's large in scale. Okay. It's very noticeable. It doesn't matter whether you stand with that operation or not. It's a huge, it's a huge thing that's going on in the world right now. So it does need to be discussed. It does need to be debated. But the only way to do that properly is to study the actual Q drops and be referring to the Q drops. There's no other way to talk about it. So when people want to go off of like media sources or like philosophical, like very sort of loose, generic philosophical ideas, to me, that's not a real discussion because you're not actually holding the same source material. And I speak about this often on Facebook and social media in general, and not just about Q, but that if we want to be having meaningful discussions about these controversial issues, we need to first agree upon a source and be discussing the same source. So the two people, they go and they read that source and then they come together and they discuss that source.
Well, it's like a book club, you know, you discuss
Yes.
the book. It doesn't mean that it's like following everything, you know, and that's
Yes.
exactly, yeah. So keep going.
Exactly. So with Q, that's really important because if you haven't actually looked at the Q drops, if you haven't studied the Q proofs, for example, and you can easily go to the website that has the Q proofs and look over them. There's hundreds now. If you're going to debunk Q, then you have the work ahead of you of going through the Q proofs and debunking them one by one. That's the body of work. If you want, like go ahead, you know, I challenge people to do that. It would be a great project. I would be fascinated by that. You know, that's what needs to be done. So I agree there are meaningful debates. I'm not surprised that people are triggered by Q or that they're upset by it. That makes perfect sense to me. But in terms of people publicly challenging Q, I rarely see anyone do any of those things and create proper dialogue around it. So that's what I invite people who are in opposition to Q to do, you know, to actually study it yourself, then to bring forward the Q proofs that you feel you can debunk, you know, actually address it directly. And then, you know, something meaningful will follow from that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think a lot of people get triggered because it represents to them, you know, Trump, or you must be a Trump supporter. And it becomes that
Yeah.
battle of right and left, and people lose the bigger picture of we're dealing with deep state and the quest for truth and human sovereignty. Like to pull it down into the lower levels of political power struggle is very frustrating.
It
Do you
is.
agree?
Totally. And I think, you know, Trump, it's funny. We're just talking about the ego and the use and the application of the ego. And to me, Trump is like this collective sort of archetype of ego. Like he is very egoic, and you know, a lot of people are really triggered by that, but in the same way that they're against ego as a fundamental sort of thing within themselves. So that's very interesting to notice. But I also recognize, and I have a great deal of compassion for this community and for, you know, truther communities, in that, you know, we're some of the most targeted communities on the planet. We have been hit with wave after wave of psyops, of false predictions, of false prophets. And so I get that people, they go there with Q. You know, they're triggered by it. They're like, this is just another psyop, because they have been psyoped over and over again.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
painful. It's so painful.
Yep. There are so many psyops introduced, and to the point where it burns people out.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there's just a lot of them. I won't even name them because some people would challenge it, and we don't need to go there. But yeah, and also just feeling, you know, something is a fraud, so everybody must be a fraud. And then almost like, I don't like how the UFO community is becoming like a joke to some people because of all this. And people have to understand, like, we're dealing with human trafficking, we're dealing with SRA, satanic ritual abuse, MK Ultra.
Yeah.
And these are the heaviest things to wrap our heads around. And this is not just talking about aliens and UFOs. I mean, there's layer upon layer upon layer. And some of us are really getting our hands in some of the hardest of areas. And I just wish, you know, people would give that a little bit more respect. And I know, you know, you are very expanded into so many areas. Just for example, with the Q drop, I investigated Rachel Chandler. I found all those websites. Some were very, very hard to find because they weren't for the public. And they started to get posted a lot. You know, I wasn't the only one that obviously that found them, of the faces of these supposed models that absolutely looked tortured and in a lot of pain. So that was an example of investigating a Q drop.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest red pills, because you can look back at how many media sources were rolling their eyes and ridiculing the idea of elite pedophilia. Right? Like that, they specifically said how ridiculous it was that all these communities are saying there's a huge elite pedophilia problem. And now it's out there. There's a massive problem with elite pedophilia. You know, it's so obvious at this point. So if you're someone who has participated in shaming people for trying to say there's elite pedophilia, then, you know, be humble, research it yourself. You know, this is a very important topic. And, you know, in Canada, this is a huge problem in Canada, and it's so much less out there than it is in America. You know, there's a serious problem with Satanism and you know, satanic ritual abuse and child trafficking here in Canada that's not being addressed properly. And you know, it's really, really painful to reconcile. Like, it's hard, especially having children, right? Like, that sort of deepens a lot of this work in a very challenging way. And you know, some of that is, I think, it's one of the deepest parts of our collective shadow, right? Is the abuse of innocence on this planet. And it's also one of the most effective tactics that, you know, that the deep state has applied, is this massive war on innocence has been very, very effective.
Oh, and treatment of animals and zoos.
Huge. And, you know, this gets into galactic karma, right? Like, in my research, what I found is that we were treated as beasts of burden. You know, we were treated as animals, as these sort of animalistic slaves. That was something that seems to have gone on Earth in our deep past many, many times, by sort of extraterrestrial races and other groups. And so, you know, now you have this this industry on Earth that tortures animals in massive, massive numbers and tears animal families apart. And you know, there's this thing called carnism that I think more people should know about. Carnism is the invisible belief system that says you should love dogs, but you should eat cows, or you should, you know, love cats, but you should eat chickens. And, you know, this is a really, really interesting phenomenon, because it very much mirrors the way that we were treated deep in our past as a humanity. That, you know, we were split into groups, and some of us were seen as sort of slavery and a cattle of some kind, while others were given like slightly more elevated positions closer to, you know, extraterrestrial authorities. And so I see a lot of mirrors there. And I often see the community, you know, very triggered by ideas of veganism and plant-based eating. And that's a very, very challenging topic, I recognize. But I think if we look at it from a collective and archetypal perspective, there's something very rich there in terms of waves of sacrifice going on this planet. Like, I think the animal issue is very important, because we live on a planet where billions of animals are like daily harmed and then put to death, and harmed and put to death. And what does that mean for the vibration of this earth? What is that doing to sort of keep this earth weighted down? And, you know, even if someone doesn't feel ready to, let's say, like, live a vegan lifestyle, that's fine. There's so many ways to remove yourself from that scale of suffering, from that whole system. You know, like, there's clothing, and there's makeup, and there's all sorts of things that we can research and remove our participation from. And, you know, I think that's another area where we could step forward more as a community, and look into why it's so triggering to deal with changing what we eat and how we live in that way.
Yeah, it's like the era. I mean, it's like the time of being triggered. I mean, the wounds of people are all coming to the surface, and it's good, because, I mean, we need to transform. Yeah, that's a tough topic. You know, I think, you know, if we live in smaller, like, we can each, you know, have land and live closer to the land and work directly with, you know, animals and plants, and have our own divine relationship. You know, that would be helpful for, you know, because I know not everybody would, you know, want to go off meat, and they've tried it and it didn't work for them. So, but yeah, the innocence thing that you're talking about is huge.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the connection between human trafficking, ritual abuse also relates to secret space programs and enslavement off planet, and how that also relates to the elitist rings and everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very easy for people to turn a blind eye and get angry and triggered, because everything, they invested in is not what they thought. But what I love about you is you have that compassion. You understand that people are in their process of awakening, and it's very uncomfortable, and it can really bring up a person's insecurities and almost embarrassment, because people want to feel smart. They want to feel like they're in the know. But, you know, this isn't about smart or not smart. This is a harsh reality, even for the people that are willing to, you know, talk about it. How do you manage just going into the rabbit hole? I mean, do you find yourself getting really kind of like weighted down or depressed by this information, or do you have ways that you can keep your energy pretty high in the face of information that you're willing to look at that a lot of people aren't?
I have caught myself overwhelmed before, absolutely, and it took me some time to find a balance. You know, the Q operation was a helpful journey for me in that regard, because it really solidified how beneficial it is to be researching as a community. That you don't need to be up at 3 a.m. going down a YouTube K-hole by yourself all the time. Like, it doesn't have to be that way.
YouTube K-hole, I love it. Oh my God.
Like, you know, we need community to move through this information and to process this information. And we do need to take breaks from it. You know, finding the balance between this work and raising a family has been very important for me, because, you know, sometimes I'm caught up in it. You know, I'm producing content, or I'm just personally researching, and I have to I have to refine my will to fully put that aside and just like be with my kids, and not like be with my kids while my mind is sort of wandering about that crazy thing I just read, but like actually be with my kids. And that really gets down to like basic mindfulness. And one of the deepest forms of sort of abuse and brainwashing that has happened on this planet is that we have lost the ability to choose where our awareness is from moment to moment. And that should be our choice. The wandering mind is a very, very subversive and sort of dangerous thing that has been installed in us. And I think that's why meditation and mindfulness they're a warfare tactic on this planet. You know, to achieve the ability to practice one-pointedness, to rest your attention on something and to make the placement of your attention fully your choice, like that's where the expression of free will begins to me. Can you rest your attention on what you want for as long as you want? And if you can't, why? What happened?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, when we think of all the energy leaks, you know, and I mean, because we're dealing with harvesting, we're dealing with a parasitic vampiric system that really wants to distract us and yank our life force. So absolutely, if we could just wake up every morning and remember that, and be very just in the moment to moment, that's really where the healing happens. It's a moment to moment thing. It's always available if we can be mindful in the moment. And that's, you know, why I highly recommend that people check out your TV series with Edge of Wonder and everything that you do, because, you know, not only is it an amazing education, it really comes back down to how we work our energy in the world, and, you know, our ability to get back to our divine center instead of all this externalization that we get lost in, which also creates a lot of argument amongst people. And it's funny, the ones that or fight against those that they don't agree with versus, you know, people that are comfortable in their own truth and they don't need to slam or insult somebody who thinks differently. I notice the difference. I feel a lot better about people and what they share when they're not destroying others or blocking them for thinking differently, versus if you say something and they're just like, they're going to dismiss you forever for it. I mean, I mean, I see people still supporting Hillary Clinton, but I'm not going to make them my enemy because I don't agree. But if I say anything that they might not agree with, it's like, okay, that person's gone from my life. You know what I mean? Like,
well, there's very violent forms of communication, and I'm a huge advocate for non-violent communication techniques. And that's another thing that people can train in and study in. You can study you can get courses in nonviolent communication, and it's really, really beautiful. And it really comes back to becoming an empath, right? Refining your capacity to be an empath, and learning how to feel into the other person and let that be the basis of your communication, to fundamentally sense where that person is at in their feeling state and start from there, instead of being focused on their beliefs or their behaviors. And, you know, this idea of behaviorism, of shaming people for improper behavior or for wrong beliefs, you know, that's another sort of deep form of mind control that's been installed on this planet. As a parent, I really learned a lot about that very early on, that there's a lot of pressure to parent with the idea of rewards and punishments. And that sort of dichotomy is like a big trap for people. And that gets embedded in people's consciousness that, you know, if someone presents themselves in as a participant in a belief system that aligns with you, then you reward them with your praise. And then if they don't, you punish them. and people need to find that dichotomy in themselves, and they need to uninstall that program pretty actively.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we need harmony amongst each other and allow, I mean, we're all heading towards the same goal, and however we, need to get there or experience along the way, we need to, create room for, and love and compassion. It's really important. And it's amazing how much there still needs to be community healing on that.
Yeah,
Like you
that's
said,
a big
this
thing.
community being targeted in waves of these psyops. But yeah, I mean, if we can face the wounds, we can heal the wounds. If we deny them, it's just going to harm our health.
Yeah. And, being authentic is painful. And I think when you have a certain level of acceptance with that you're on a planet where being authentic is just going to be painful and uncomfortable. If you can get to a place where you sort of just soften into that, you can progress like a lot more quickly.
Yes. I love that you work real close with kids, Rainbow Kids Yoga, certified in the art of creating children's meditations. I mean, and then you have this theater background.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's so great because the theater thing, I
Yeah,
mean,
that was huge for me.
it seems like you have not lost your connection with your inner child, but you know how to create structure and be a guide and be in an authority position. And working with the youth is so huge. Is that something you do kind of like in your everyday kind of life at home?
Well, I mean, it has become that all that sort of training has manifested in two ways. A lot of it obviously goes into being with my children. I have two sons. I have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so that training was really preparation for that. But what I noticed in that training was that it was actually more preparing me to address people's innocence. So it's actually helped me in working with adults more than children, because learning to create content that speaks directly to someone's innocence and that recognizes someone's innocence inherently, there's an immediate impact that can occur there. And I think when we practice finding innocence again and again in every situation, there's a form of communication that sort of reveals itself to us in the moment. That's really important. I've studied with an intuitive empath named Lujan Mattis, and I bring his work up often because it's very, very sort of paramount to where I'm at spiritually. And he talks about how awareness on this planet has been recalibrated to cloak innocence, and that because our own innocence is cloaked from us, then the innocence of the other becomes invisible to us. And as soon as you can't see someone's innocence, then it becomes very easy to snap on that person, to shame them, to attack them. So, in my training with like kids yoga and kids meditation, I started to realize that there's a medicine that needs to be applied on this earth that is very much focused on on a daily basis, just consistently unveiling innocence, decloaking innocence over and over again as a personal practice, as a way of interacting, as a nonviolent form of communication. And so, with this series, I'm very much focused on trying to do that. I get into like really sort of deep metaphysical things and very conspiratorial things, but I'm always trying to like button it with personal power, personal responsibility, and where our innocence lies within all of that. And, I feel very passionate about that. And that's very medicinal for me. Doing that again and again for community has helped me heal a lot of the deeper wounds that I'm working on from, this life and other lives.
Yeah, no kidding. Right. So I know this is kind of shifting gears, and I want to go back to talking about the TV series, and then I know we'll have to close, even though I know I could talk to you for so long. It's just like, okay, got to look at the clock here. So like breeding programs. I mean, as we enter new earth energies, I guess, lack of a better word right now. And we hear about different breeding programs and the things that have happened, with these agendas that have been very secret that we're finding out more and more about. What are your thoughts about sort of, hybrids coming to earth and just how it's going to be being more open to our galactic heritage? And how do you see, especially somebody like you who is very much a guide in this process, how do you see us kind of shifting without needing to put you in that state of, prediction, but just energetically, what do you see this transition in how this is going to be introduced and how we're going to acclimate to a more galactic kind of awareness, in the breeding programs, and wrapping our head around, these abduction scenarios that have facilitated this.
Well, I think there's something called antecedent knowledge, where it's this idea that to conceptualize a new knowledge set, you have to have like the knowledge base that's going to allow you to even conceptualize the information you're being given. So I think that transition into sort of hybrids and learning to understand the genetic manipulation at the heart of our sort of journey here, it has to begin with us learning about the history of that. So there has to be, I think, a larger effort at studying the history of genetic manipulation for humanity, because that's going to give us a sense of the cycles that are involved here, right? Because there's so many cycles coming to a close right now, and with Earth as the focal point. It's so many layers of like cycles upon cycles. Like I think that's why this is such an epic time. And so I think, we have a great responsibility to the best of our ability to study that history and to understand why the genetic aspect is so important. And my understanding is that the genetic aspect is important because our bodies are the vehicle for our free will. And so there's been a lot of manipulation of genetics as a tactic to manipulate free will, to manipulate our capacity to express ourselves in this material realm. So when I, look at the idea of a lot of this coming out sort of in a larger, more public way, I think there does need to be that antecedent knowledge. It needs to come out packaged with the history of this, of why genetics are such an important component here. And I know that this is something that Corey Good, I think, really introduced people to, was the notion that this is a spiritual and genetic war. It's both of those things. And that's initially hard for people to wrap their heads around, because we live on a planet where materialism and spirituality have been really, really pulled apart from each other. And so we have some work to do at understanding how tied genetics are to spirituality and the way they sort of intermingle. So to me, history and that understanding of that connection, that's the antecedent knowledge. That's the knowledge base that we really need to work on, so that we can welcome that new information coming out in a larger way.
Right. Do you see like humans just in their awakening, it's like we'll really start to feel our DNA, upgrade, and, as kind of weird as everything feels right now and still sort of disconjoined, do you see just that progression of our abilities really coming back, and us bypassing artificial intelligence, engineered timelines? And
Yes, absolutely. Because there's that fundamental connection between consciousness and our spiritual nature and our genetics, that naturally that awakening is going to impact our genetics. You look at, what's his name? I think it's Lipton. Is it Bruce Lipton? Uh-huh. He talks a lot about the way your consciousness literally affects your DNA. And this is a really important mechanism to understand, that our awakening process, it can't not impact our DNA, because they're intimately linked.
Yep.
And, when we learn to understand that as individuals, and when we watch our own awakening occurring, we have to recognize that any shift or expansion in consciousness we're experiencing is naturally a modification of our DNA. That's an unavoidable outcome. And so as we progress as a humanity, I do believe in this tipping point, in this idea that if 1% of humanity gets to a certain level of consciousness, there will be a cascade that occurs throughout the planet and throughout humanity. And if there's going to be a cascade in consciousness, then I believe that the morphogenic field of the human DNA will offer itself to humanity at large at that time. That makes a lot of sense to me, that if DNA is presented to us through this non-local morphogenic field, then working as a community to push for that 1% of humanity crystallizing this higher consciousness, it's going to avail the rest of humanity to different forms of DNA quite naturally, because they're so intimate.
Oh, beautifully put. Yep, I'm right there with you. And it wouldn't make any sense to have a belief that, you know, things are going to be doom and gloom either. So, you know, it's kind of a weird question, but just hearing your wisdom connected to that, I think, is why I asked it, because obviously we wouldn't want to put our attention on that. It's more the unconsciousness that is very vulnerable to those possibilities. But we've come so far, and I think it's just incredible.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
I know. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about this TV show. So you've already done, you said 2 episodes. How many more left? How can people find it? And what are some of the themes that are being most highlighted?
Okay. So the show is called Worlds Within. Episodes come out every Wednesday on edgeofwonder.tv. And, you know, this first season that I'm doing is called The Metaphysics of Warfare. And it's a really deep dive into understanding the sort of the metaphysical nature of war itself, and all the metaphysical sort of mechanisms and histories and ideas that actually surround warfare on this planet. So the first episode, I get into the wisdom of war and just sort of start to create some fundamental definitions that support us in what I'm going to be talking about throughout the series. And the episode that came out last week was called Occulted Warfare. And I really got into the Toronto Protocols, which is a document that came out in 1995 that outlined deep state plans for the New World Order. And, you know, I really am working to connect things like that, the actual documents that people are finding and researching, to your everyday life and your personal spiritual battles, and how informing ourselves, you know, about this wild conspiracy theory material actually is very empowering if we bring it into our lives in a certain way, if we hold that knowledge very lightly. So this is going to be a 7-part series where I'm going to go through the arc of all these different forms of warfare that exist on this planet. You know, from biological warfare to psychological warfare to temporal wars, and why it's important for us to understand these things in terms of our everyday capacity to be of service. Because I really feel they're deeply connected, but I feel that sometimes in this community and just in people that are welcomed into this community, there's a tendency to sort of get lost in the awe of this material and just the sort of like empty chase of new information. And, you know, that's a trap that I noticed early on in my process, created a lot of anxiety. You know, the desire to get the next best bit of information is, it's kind of an endless sort of stressful way to live. But if we're looking at these sort of incredible discoveries with an eye at integrating it towards service, it can really transform it. So, you know, I'm really, really excited about this series. It's been such an amazing opportunity. And, you know, I love the work that Ben and Rob are doing with Edge of Wonder. I think it's like just a huge gift to the world, and to sort of be a part of what they're doing has been really incredible. So, you know, I'm really excited about people's feedback on this, because I'm working to find ways into this information that are new. And so, you know, even people who consider themselves seasoned in this material and in this awakening process, there's still going to be something new. There's going to be new perspectives and understandings that I believe I'm offering, that I think can sort of rejuvenate our process as a community and inspire us to take things, you know, a little step further, to take our service deeper into kindness and deeper into understanding, even though we're pushing this crazy information on the world.
Dang. Oh my gosh. Oh, it's just so wonderful that you're doing this. I'm so thrilled that we got a chance to connect. I know we've been trying to do this for a while.
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, just gosh, everybody check him out. All that information is going to be in the description of the video. And I could just, oh gosh, just,
I know we could go on
questions, and it's just so incredible to talk to you. I
Oh,
really,
you know what? I will offer a link too. I'll offer a link for the description where, for those of you that aren't subscribed to edgeofwonder.tv, you can get a discount on an annual subscription. So we'll include that link in there for anyone who's looking to join in on what they've got. You know, they've got really like a lot of new content coming. Justin Deschamps is about to launch his series this week, Into the Storm. So people should keep an eye out for that. And just generally, like the content that's being put on that platform is super, super amazing. It's well worth the bit of money that you pay for it.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I think I'm in the works of soon doing one myself, which I look forward to
All
doing.
right.
Yeah, we've had discussions a while back, but we'll see how the kind of dates manifest. But yeah,
Yeah.
everybody, just really good stuff. All that info, like I said, will be in the description. Anything else about websites or anything you want to share?
Yeah, and you can follow me on Facebook, Simon Esler 1111. I'm also on Instagram and YouTube. I recently posted my talk from Dimensions of Disclosure, which is on metaphysical activism. And it really gets into the particular skill set that extraterrestrials have had to develop to infiltrate this planet in the way that they have. So their capacity to perceive timelines, their ability to perceive subtle layers of our existence, so subtle layers of the human body and the human mind, and why it's important that we as a community sort of step into those subtle realms and those subtle sets of information, and that that's a step forward that I'm offering the community as a teaching. So you can check out my Dimensions of Disclosure talk on my YouTube channel. And yeah, please, any feedback people want to give me for content, for things like that, send it my way. I'm happy to do more.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Simon. And I look forward to just keeping up with you, and really grateful for our connection. And yeah,
Yeah, me too.
everybody check it out. It's really, really good stuff. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.